Hi guys, hopefully this is welcoming you back to Chatters DIY and hopefully you've been following the previous episodes on this DIY loft conversion. This is episode 3 and today we're going to be concentrating on the structure of the roof, a couple of early shots and before shots that I've managed to dig out. Also the structure of the studwork, the dwarf walls and the insulation as well. So stick around. It's a little bit of a shorter video. Hopefully that suits some people because of my boring tones. And yeah, hope you enjoy this one. See you later.
Right then, this is where it all began. This is the desk that I'd got set up there before I'd done any of the work. You can see that there's no insulation on the roof structure or anything. I've even still got a piece of wood on the floor trying to lay out where the ensuite's going to be and where everything and how everything's going to fit in there. All my plans was drawn up on this temporary light board with a piece of perspex and some normal clips, grips, clamps, whatever you want to call them. And yeah, that was quite enjoyable being up there. This is another before shot, and after the pictures was all the drawings was finished, that desk just got loaded up with rubbish. We'd done quite a bit of a clear out at this point to try and create the space up there. As you can see at the top right hand corner of the picture, you can see I've started fitting the rafters onto the front side of the building. And on the next shot now you should see them a little bit better. Yep. You can see the bottom of them, the bird mouthed onto the purlin. Each one of those was cut sort of bespoke for that purlin. Obviously being so old, it curves in two directions. It sort of comes inwards into sort of horizontally inwards into the room, but also sort of bends downwards as well with the weight of the roof over the 70 years. So fitting a straight rafter to a roof that sort of curves and bends was quite difficult, but getting them all in line was even more difficult. I ended up making what I call a rafter jig, which I think is what you can see there stood up against the chimney. And effectively it allowed me to accurately measure each one, so when I pulled a string along from one end to the other I could line it up, and they kind of, or I would say about within a 5 or 6 mil tolerance all the way along. So that's not bad going for such a large building or such an expanse. But you can see how well the rafter jig worked by looking at the bird's mouths and see how well it fit. Because as well as bending inwards, it also twists a little bit, so the angles of each cut have to be bespoke as well, and that worked out extremely well. Unfortunately, the footage of using that got lost when my phone played up. But again, this is now, you know, a bit more closer up. You can see how well they fit onto there. This was before the bolts went through though, so the two rafters then got bolted together at the bottom end and then halfway up, and then the collar tie was suffice at the top. You can see the collar ties there at the top that we were just talking about, but you've seen this shot before on a previous video if you've been keeping in touch with this this series. The wall that you can see in the background there is the gable wall, and I think I've already mentioned, but there's no cavity insulation in the majority, or certainly in that section where the stud wall is in front of it. It actually sits, that wall sits on top of the part of the brick where it juts out, where the cavity wall insulation actually begins just above the floor level and then runs down through the habitable part of the house. So that section there needed 50 mil insulation board. On the roof structure, on the sloping roof, we've actually got 70 mil insulation board, and then the dwarf walls, that's all 100 mil, so that's 4 inches, and that's regulation. That's a nice amount. So on this one, on this shot, you can see that obviously there's a little bit more structure to it. Started putting the insulation into the gable wall, trying to use up some of the bits that I'd got. I didn't want to buy another sheet of 50mm than what I'd ended up buying. And as you can see there, there's one section that's made up of a few offcuts, but that wasn't a problem because I just taped the joints. You can see there that I've had to put one little piece of plasterboard in so I could at least get the light for the ensuite in more or less the right position. That's because it was originally at the end of the wall that I've had to build, so it was getting moved anyway. The pipes that you can see coming out the floor there, just in front of the gable wall, are for the towel radiator. The roofing insulation is nearly almost complete at this point. The one section up the top of the ensuite wall there, I had to wait obviously until that section of wall was in and then boarded, so that I had something to actually put the insulation up against. On this shot you can actually see how well the insulation boards are cut around the collar ties as well, but any of those gaps that you can see, the little gaps at the bottom, they got filled in with expanding foam. So it was actually it's only friction fitted, but it was a very, very good friction fit. Another shot of the insulation. You can also see at the bottom of this, underneath the beautiful blue sky that was outside, the dwarf wall at the bottoms took shape as well, and the insulation panels have started to go into there as well. This is the front side of the house dwarf wall. Most of this wall is, as you can see, access panels into the eaves. The small gaps in between were filled with the 4-inch insulation, and then the access panel you can see on the floor is just a bare panel. Obviously the insulation board goes into that as well, so the whole thing ends up being insulated. It's just got some it's just the wooden section, the wooden framework, which I've tried to keep to a minimum. That will be slightly more passive, but it shouldn't be an issue. The other side of these boards has actually got a multi-foil insulation, which you'll see in a moment. So it's not going to get particularly cold in there. Certainly not as cold as what it was, the loft was prior to any of the building work. On the opposite side of the room, this is the access panel to the right of where the door is going to be. This wall is actually covered in plywood because the plan is that this isn't going to get plastered, it's going to get clad with wood because the bed's going to be there. Basically that dwarf wall is going to act or look as if it's going to be like one big headboard, and these doors are also going to get clad in the same wood, and so they'll be quite discreet. Obviously the big chunky hinges will give it away, but they're lift-off hinges, so you'll see now how thick the door is. Obviously it's like a 4x2 frame. If need be, if that takes up too much of the opening, I can take the door off temporarily while we're transporting large pieces through the opening, or if I've got to get my large frame through there, I might need some help. And as we look through, you can see there that's the multi-foil insulation that's on the original rafters. That section's not built up at all. It's the cheaper insulation, multi-foil insulation, so it's not as efficient as the super quilt that you can see on this section, but it certainly does the trick by stopping the drafts. The super quilt is the equivalent of 2 inches of PIR insulation, but it's actually it can be reduced down quite thin. Certainly where you put the battens in and build up the from each one of those battens is in line with where the rafters are. If you don't put those battens on, when you secure the plasterboard to the rafters, it would look like a Chesterfield settee. It would bulge in certain areas and be pulled in at others, and probably actually just completely penetrate and the plasterboard itself, and it'd lose its integrity. But that battening was quite a task in the end. I had to do all the flat section of the ceiling and buy an extra 2 packs more than I expected to use. But once that super quilt was up, it made a massive difference to the insulative qualities of the room. The sound went down, and there was stopped all the draft because all the overlapping sections of it are taped, so it basically seals the room. And you can see there, this is the section I had to leave exposed for quite some time for the second inspection from the council. I could show there that they've got the PIR insulation in place and the super quilt on top, and that was my way of evidencing it, and they were perfectly happy with it, thank God. I was really happy at this point. Everything was going swimmingly. After this, I finished off all the plasterboarding and put the stairs in, and I'd like you to join me and invite you to join me for them. If you want to be there and see how we progress any further, please subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, then get your notifications, and I'll see you on episode 4. Thanks a lot for listening. Chatters DIY out.